Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian. This week, we've got a guest of ours from the greater Minneapolis area, actually going to talk about the 3-hour radius around Minneapolis and what great angling is available for you in a multitude of situations. We've got Josh Besser on the line. And Josh, you operate an outfit called Larry the Lunker. Great name. I love it. It's also an outfit that does put you on lunkers, because I know you got some crazy stuff coming out of the lakes up there. And then what you were telling me around the downtown area, it sounds real interesting. So we're going to dive into, the Minneapolis, I would say, greater area, right? That 3-hour radius. And then we're also going to talk about at the end some of the ways that you have, I guess the tip would be positioning yourself for the swing versus what a lot of people look at as, hey, I'm going to get in this spot and then I'm going to adjust my line and or my rod or cast, etc. But you're really adamant about, hey, look, sometimes you can put yourself in the right position and that's going to set you up totally different for your swing and really in a more opportunistic perspective. So, Josh, welcome to the show, man. We're looking forward to hearing about the fishing, but I want to kick it off with a little bit of your former history. You were a snowboarder, big time, and kind of give us a lead in on that. From like, hey, I went into snowboard, did that for a while, and then I made my transition. How'd that go?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Christian. Appreciate it. So I started snowboarding in Minneapolis area when I was 7 years old, and just kind of fell in love with it. My mom would drop me off at Highland Hills here, just a local hill in Minneapolis. And I'd be there, every single day.
Right.
Yeah, it was kind of my daycare. I did some team sports, but that was one that I ended up stopped playing hockey and stopped playing football and kind of stopped all that and just stuck with snowboarding and skateboarding in my free time.
Yeah.
And then graduated from high school and moved to Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and was going to college, and basically just being a snowboard bum, and ended up spending almost 9 years out there, kind of chasing a semi-professional snowboard career. Filming videos. Ended up getting a couple sponsors. And traveling a little bit around the world with it. And I had a great run with it. And now I kind of get into that age where I'm sick of falling down and getting hurt all the time.
Right. All the bump stops on the rails now and everything else.
Yeah.
Like it's always been bad, from a skate and a snowboard, like trying to get away with it scenario. But now it's ruthless, man. Everywhere you go, there's bump stops, and it's just tough. So
yeah, it's
good transition. Fly fishing is a little easier on the body.
Yeah, I still fall down sometimes fly fishing in the river, but it's not less consequences.
It's like an ice bath. People are paying for those ice baths now, and it's like, hey, just go fly fishing.
Just
take a couple slips.
Fill your waders up once. It's
right. I love it. But you've been fishing for 11 years. I'm assuming you probably fished the elk over there in Steamboat, and you've been guiding for 5 or 6 years now, and you've got quite a bit of good activity around you. So let's jump into the Minneapolis area, because I think a lot of people underestimate the quality of the fisheries around there, just because it's a Midwestern state and they think, oh, conventional angler, go out on the big lake and, rip big spoons and things like that. But there's a lot of good fly fishing around there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started fly fishing in Colorado and basically just focused on trout and stuff. And I grew up in Minnesota, fishing for bass and walleye with conventional gear with my dad and whoever. But I moved back here after living in Colorado 9 years, and I didn't even know what the driftless was. And I was like, we have trout an hour away from Minneapolis? No way. So, so we just have a lot of really good fishing. Within 3 hours of the cities, you can be fishing the Mississippi downtown Minneapolis for smallmouth, walleye, there's bigmouth buffalo, bowfin, quillback, carp, you name it, whatever species you want is right there in our backyards. You drive an hour north, you got the upper Mississippi. It's world-class smallmouth fishery. There's also some muskie in there. They got walleye and red horse and carp and everything else up there, but it's a lot smaller water. Not really what you'd think when you hear Mississippi. You think huge river, all these locks
Right.
and dams and kind of dirtier water. But basically everything up there until the Mississippi runs into the Minnesota River, it's an excellent river. I mean, it's world class smallmouth up there. We fish it, and I have a 14 and a half foot high drift boat that we float up there all the time, and that's a blast. And then if you drive 3 hours north, you got all the South Shore tributaries on Lake Superior, and you can also drive up the North Shore of Minnesota, and hit all those tributaries for steelhead, and we got lake run browns, kings, cohos, you name it. So there's definitely a wide variety of fishing to choose from, and that's just rivers. We also have all the lakes too, which is great fishing as well.
So when you kind of picked up the area as a guide, did you specify a certain or become specific in a certain area that was like, hey, I really want to focus on this for a while and drive from there?
Yeah. So I think my favorite species, and still my favorite to this day, when I started guiding, was I just loved chasing the lake run rainbows, steelhead, whatever you want to call them. I'm going to go with steelhead, but those were my favorite. And then the smallmouth, pound for pound, I would say just one of the hardest fighting freshwater fish we have around here. But I got into guiding actually with one of my best friends who I lived with in Steamboat, and we were snowboard buddies. His father-in-law kind of started a fly shop in the Driftless area in Lanesboro, Minnesota. It's called Root River Rod Co. And his father-in-law ended up passing away this last year, unfortunately. But now Lance and his partner Elena are owners of the fly shop down there, and Lance really got me into guiding. And we do trout down there, and it's on the Root River down there, which is southeast Minnesota of the Driftless. And we do actually do drift boat trips and guide out at drift boats down there and do some walk and wade stuff, but that's all trout. But there is some smallmouth in that river too, which is kind of fun. So some of the floats you're fishing, be fishing a streamer for trout the first half of it, and then all of a sudden it kind of opens up, and then you're catching smallmouth and trout, which is kind of a blast. But that's kind of how I got into guiding, was with my buddy Lance down there at Root River Rod Co. And then a couple years later, I launched my own business called the Larry the Lunker, and I focus mainly on Great Lakes steelhead, and the lake run browns and that up there, and then the smallmouth game up on the upper Mississippi. So
okay, let's talk about that steelhead and lake run brown scenario.
Yeah.
We haven't had too many people on the show to actually dive into that in detail, and you see the photos all the time, and I've done some of that in New York and whatnot, but and Pennsylvania, but it's I don't think people really understand like the quality of fish that you're getting into. Can you kind of talk through that a little bit and give us some color around that?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have a lot of fish, that's for sure. At least from what I hear, compared to my buddies that live out in Pacific Northwest and fish the real steelhead out there. But it's really cool with the lake run browns and steelhead. Like, that's why fall is probably my favorite time of year up there, because you kind of have a shot at 4 different species between the cohos, the kings, lake run browns, and your steelhead.
Yeah, let's I'm going to interrupt because open it up with like how the runs start, like what goes first,
Yeah.
Bam, 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 bam down the line, and how that sets you up for that fall
Yeah.
season.
So fall season, like south shore of Lake Superior, so in northern Wisconsin, on the river I spend the most time at. Um, as soon as July, August, lake run browns and kings can start moving in to the system. Following that, you'll have your steelhead and coho mixed in there as well. So pretty much by September, mid-September is kind of prime time to kind of have a shot at all four species, because as you know, like once the kings get in there and spawn, they'll die off, and then that's that.
Yeah.
But that's what's great about the fall up there. Once you hit mid-September, and our river closes there mid-November, so you got a solid 2.5, 3 months to fish it in the fall. And as far as like targeting them, it's just kind of it just kind of happens. It's not like I go out and say, I'm going to catch lake run browns today in the river. It's
Right.
more so about you just covering ground. That's, I think, the way to be most productive up there is, spending 15, 20 minutes, fish a hole, fish it really well. And then move on. And what happens is you'll start finding, the pods of fish. And usually where you find one, whether it's a steelhead or a lake run brown in a hole, there's probably another one. So keep fishing in that zone, or keep fishing that hole, or spend a little more time there. But some of those lake run browns, they hang out there too. And even some will even kind of, I don't know if they're just following the spring run in or what, but we were up there 3 weeks ago and my buddy caught a 26-inch lake run brown. I don't know why it was in there in the month, in the month of May, but you never know. But that's kind of how it happens up there. Is I get some clients that have really wanted to catch a lake run brown up there. They've caught a couple steelhead, and they're like, hey, how do you target these fish? And you don't. You just do the same thing you're doing for steelhead, and it just happens.
Yeah. And do you see a big influence from water too? Like, hey, if you guys get rain or you don't have rain, it turns the run on or turns the run off. We see that, I think, in Pennsylvania quite a bit. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yep. The same thing. Um, it's very similar to those, runoff rivers in Ohio and, PA and that sort of thing. But we do have, a sustaining population of residential trout year round. So we do have, colder water springs or creeks and stuff coming in too. But the rain and especially snow melt in the spring, if you're talking that, have a huge effect on the river itself and if it's going to be fishable. And also, you get a big bump in rain or whatever, it's going to push a bunch of fish in, and then open up the mouth area, and letting them in. But it's definitely that river. You got to keep an eye on that, U.S. Geological Survey graph, online, and keep an eye on the CFS. And they actually have, most of the rivers, even some on the North Shore, most of them have a graph you can kind of go off of. And if they don't have one for that specific river, you can kind of go off a river near that one and look at that graph. And usually, it's pretty close.
Yeah. And when you're looking at the flows, are you looking for like an average flow or above or below? What's your kind of, it's going to be good today?
So, you just kind of know from experience or just from the history of them, right? Like if there's going to be fishing this time of year or not. Let's go with October 15th. Yeah, it's going to be loaded with fish. But if you want to go off clarity, and it fishes best when it's on the drop, in my opinion. And there's average flows. Let's say, I would say that the river I spend the most time on fishes pretty dang good at 250 CFS. But this spring, it was after snow melt, it jumped all the way up to I think 1100 or 1200 CFS, and it usually doesn't drop back into shape, until about 400 CFS on the drop. But this year, it got so warm, we had like 4 or 5 feet of snow up there. All of a sudden, it was 80 degrees, so everything just kind of let go at once, and it blew out super gnarly. And it ended up fishing pretty well at 500, on the drop where you had at least, 14 inches of visibility. It was harder wade fishing, but it was that was kind of our spring up here. Was you couldn't even cross the river.
A little unique.
You kind of stuck to one side. It was hard wading, but there was fish around, and we were getting them. So,
all right, let's talk technique.
Yeah.
Are you running like nymph style rigs with egg patterns? Are you swinging? Or are you doing a little bit of both? What's your style and approach?
Yeah, definitely a little bit of both. My favorite way to catch them is on the swing, just because, I'm just addicted to getting that grab, It's kind of same feeling you get if you watch a trout eat a dry fly, you just feel it, or it's visual, whatever. I just love feeling that grab, and I think it's a little more exciting. But
are you single-handing that, or are you running a Skagit or Spey?
Yeah, usually a Skagit. And I'll do single hand or two-handed rods. And then, we'll nymph for them as well. It's pretty productive. And, the nymph rig, your basic 9-foot 8-weight, running a stonefly to an egg pattern.
Yep.
Tried and true. It just works. Works everywhere. Yeah. But, for swinging, there's a lot of, overhanging trees, and it's a lot of those tributaries up there. They're quite small. Like the longest cast you would need to make to hit the other bank is maybe 60 feet, if that. So you can get away. Like I've never had a situation up there where I have my single hand set up with the Skagit head and haven't been able to hit the other bank. And that's nice to have the single hand. It's easier hiking around through the woods with, and it's also if let's say you're fishing on a run, and you got overhanging trees ahead of you, it's a lot easier to get a 9-foot rod and you can kind of sidearm your D-loop underneath it versus you have a 12-foot long two-handed rod. There's a lot more stuff to hit around, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but I do, my main setup was it's a 9-foot 8-weight with, or 7-weight with the Skagit head, or I also have an 11.5-foot, 7-weight with the Skagit head. Whatever works. I think if you had anything bigger than that, it's kind of unnecessary, and you're going to have a tough time casting with all the cover and also just hiking around.
What are you typically swinging? What are your kind of top patterns or styles that you like to utilize?
One of my favorite, the intruder, that kind of style fly. I tie a lot of those just because I love tying them, and kind of doing those big composite loops and all the flash, all the ostrich, all the cool feathers. I think
stacking them up. Just laying them out.
It's just fun, right?
It's fun, like picking. And how's this going to turn out?
Yeah, and then it's like
a little science project.
Yeah, versus like, oh damn, my box is getting low on stoneflies. Damn it, I have to tie stoneflies. I don't have as much fun with it, but I throw a lot of fancy intruder style kind of stuff. All Ed Ward's kind of stuff. I love tying that kind of stuff, but also we throw some simple stuff too. Like sometimes, I think one of the most productive flies, hands down, for some reason, it's the olive woolly bugger. Just swinging that. Had stupid success on that, especially if it's like low and clear, and the water's low. Like it just works. They love it, and a lot of species do. It's the stupid woolly bugger works the best for some reason, but
right. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Let's jump back to the nymphing thing real quick, because you had mentioned that, the standard stonefly and egg pattern, and there's a bunch of different egg patterns. This is a bunch of different stonefly patterns. But what I want to kind of talk about is how you actually rig it up with your weight and whatnot. And is that in the fly, or are you running your weight above the flies or below the flies? Every guy does it a little different. But I've found some techniques that work a little better in this type of fishing scenario. Curious on
absolutely. So what I found for the nymphing setup to be the most productive, and I like to get kind of super nerdy with this shit and probably overthink it sometimes, but it's been working for me really well. I'll run more of a 90-degree rig off the indicator, so instead of running a big, long tapered leader, I'll run the same butt section of whatever it is, 40-pound mono of leader section. I'll run that to a micro swivel, and then I'll run 2x off of that. If the water's a little dirtier, or if I'm fishing and there's a bunch of log jams and shit there, I will even run 1x because they're really not that leader shy. I mean, I've caught them in pretty clear water on 1x, and that way you can put the brakes on, if they're gonna brush bang you.
Right.
Yeah. At least have a chance at landing them. Because they are crazy when you do hook them. But my stone flies I tie, that has my weight in it. So off the swivel, I'll run about 4 feet, 5 feet of straight 2x. And that's where you get the 90-degree rig, because that thinner tippet material versus a tapered leader is going to cut through that water a lot quicker and be more true and riding directly underneath your indicator. My stone flies I tie in a size 6 or size 8. I use the Umpqua U555 60-degree jig hook. It's a streamer hook, 2 times strong. I've never really bent one out on a fish, I don't think. And I'll run a 4.6 millimeter tungsten bead on that. So there's my weight, and sometimes I'll wrap the thorax in a little lead-free wire. Off of that, I'll run 12, 14 inches of the 2x and run that to a peg egg or a yarn egg, whatever egg pattern you want. But we have a lot of success out here on the green or chartreuse bead. We call it the Mountain Dew, but that works really well spring and fall. So
it ain't got chartreuse, it ain't no use, right?
I found it does not work in Alaska that well, but yeah, for some reason it works here.
Yeah, Alaska, the one I found is the the orangish kind of creamsicle bead with a little bit of opal nail polish on it.
Yeah, I mean we have the lake run browns, spawning in the fall, and their eggs are more of a greenish yellow color, but still you go in the spring and throw the green bead and the steelhead will still smack it.
Still eat it. Yeah, I like how you run that jig-headed stonefly.
I have a reason behind
probably
it.
Probably keeps you.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I want to hear it.
If you think about it and you're running a tandem rig like that and you're running split shot, it's going to get you down there, but here's your split shot, and then you got 14, 16 inches, there's your stone fly, and then another 14, 16 inches, there's your bead. So that's, your bottom fly is 30 inches away from that weight. And if you think about that thing going through the water column, your egg's probably up here, a couple feet above the fish, while your split shot's bumping bottom in the fish's face. So the idea with the heavy jig head bug, and that why it's on a jig, is that it's going to ride hook point up. That's going to be bumping on bottom right in the fish's face. And, right behind that, it's only going to be maybe 6 inches higher in the water column is going to be your bead. So that's going to be in the strike zone.
Right.
I think a better presentation.
Yeah, I like that, because you figure, I mean, right, like you got a king, for example, coming up. You bring that stonefly that's bouncing when they're settling and waiting, but when they start to move, boom, they're up 3 inches. Now they're in that zone. Oh, egg.
Absolutely, and when you're
a
lot of this time we're fishing like in the spring. The water temp can be. And late in the fall, water temps, we're talking 37 degrees. So it's cold, and they aren't going to be that active to go, move up and go 2 feet above where they're sitting to eat, even to eat an egg, So I think getting down and dirty with a heavy rig like that and in their face is a good thing. And then also I found with most of the salmon, like cohos and kings that I have hooked on the rivers up there, have been on the same stonefly, but I'll tie it with like some pink wire to segment the body. For some reason, they really like that. That works well. Or a hot head on the stone on your tungsten bead, with a pink bead, or orange, or we throw chartreuse ones too.
Okay. Now, when you're talking about the swing scenario, let's break down your rigging there and kind of talk through that a little bit, and maybe some of your techniques, just like we did with the nymphing, so we can give guys an idea of what's going
Yeah,
on there.
for steelhead, I mean, you can make it as complicated or as simple as you want it to be. I think the simplest way to kind of explain it up there, like let's say you're just getting into it and you don't know what tips to get, or am I getting deep enough, whatever. You'd be good if you get, 3 tips. You get a 10-foot section of T8, a 10-foot section of T11, and a 10-foot section of T14. If you have all those, you can fish it when the water's low. You can fish it when it's ripping. As far as flies go, I like tying or throwing a weightless fly. I think you get better movement out of it, that sort of thing, when you're actually fishing it. So I always will fish a weightless fly if I can get away with it. This spring when we had that huge blowout and we were fishing pretty fast water, I did end up having to switch to a weighted fly. But yeah, that's the tips I'll run, and I'll run that on whatever Skagit line you want. I like the Scientific Anglers Spay Light is a great one. I run the 480 grain on my 11 and a half foot 7 weight. But yeah, you run that to your 10-foot section. And then as far as leaders go, I usually use either 14 or 20 pound, just fluorocarbon. I'll do a perfection loop on the end of that, put that to my sink tip, and I will only run about 14 inches of leader to my fly. Reason being, if you start running a longer piece of tippet after your sink tip, it's going to be a lot harder to cast, and your fly is not going to really, stay true to where your sink tip is actually in the water column. So let's say you had 5-foot
Right.
leader.
It's going to drift.
If you had a 5-foot leader hanging off the end of your sink tip, that fly is going to be way up in the water column. Same example of why I run the bug and bead that way with the, run it tight and close. And the fish isn't going to care. It's not going to see the leader. Sometimes I get lazy, I only have 10 inches of tippet on there, and I'm like, screw it, I'll just tie this on. It works because they're downstream of your fly, right? They're not going to see that leader necessarily. So
yeah, they're not coming back to it. It's swinging in front of them. If anything, coming up
exactly.
to it.
And with those, with those 3 tips, you can tell if you're kind of getting deep enough. If you just cast straight across the river, do a big mend right away, and kind of let it slowly sink down before it engages, you should be, ticking bottom pretty close to like when that fly actually starts engaging and swinging. If you're not ticking bottom, throw on a heavier tip. Or if you really have to and it's really ripping, don't take your steps down river with your swing until after you cast, and that'll help kind of get you down deeper to where you need to be.
Gotcha. So you're saying make your cast, throw your mend, take a couple steps, and that puts slack in the system and lets it
just
fall.
Allows it to fall.
Okay.
You kind of walk it down with it, and allows it to drop. And if you're fishing a faster run and you're like, man, this really doesn't feel like I'm getting down, and I would definitely take steps after. I do, anywhere between a 1-step and 4-step approach when I'm swinging a run. If it's really dirty water, I'll only do 1 step in between my swings, in between my casts, excuse me. And if it's, clear water and warmer water, you don't want to waste your buddy's time who's waiting to fish behind you. Take 4 steps in between your swing and get through the run. Those fish will move.
I was just going to say that the methodology or the thought behind that is that if it's clearer water, they're seeing it, so I can move more. If it's dirty water, I could be putting it, 8 inches in front of them and they're not seeing it. So I want to take a step and put it 3 inches
between
in front
that
of them.
and water temps as well have a play in that. If it's 37-degree water temp, that fish is not going to move 5 or 10 feet to come crush your fly. If your water temp's at 55, you're going to have pretty aggressive fish coming out to eat that thing.
Right. They're in that metabolic feeding.
They'll run across the whole run like a brown trout would in a stream to come hit your streamer, right?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think the next order to kind of talk about, which is something that until you experience it, it's hard to describe. But that's when you're fishing these runs like this for these Lake Run Steelhead and Lake Run Browns and Kings, cohos. When you hook one, what the hell do you do? Because you think like, oh yeah, we're trout fishing, but it's not trout
Yeah,
fishing.
it's a rodeo for sure. And that's one thing I love about guiding for steelhead. It can be a grind, right? Like some days you're fishing 8 hours up there to have one or two shots. So you want everything to come together correctly when it does happen. But I love taking someone up there who's never hooked one of these, lake run fish, and just to, even if it's only for like 5 or 10 seconds and that thing's exploding on top of the water, they always look at me with the kind of same expression. They're just like jaw drop, like, that's a trout, like what? Because it's usually a rodeo, and we have big fish. I mean, I'd say like the year class kind of average this last couple years has been around the 26-inch range, on the river I
Mm-hmm.
fished there on the South Shore. And 5-6 years ago, they were around 22 or 23 inches on average. So it's pretty good. We had one guy I know that guy's up there. I think he hooked a 33-inch steelhead this spring up there. So we have some absolute units, and they get pretty fired up. So I don't care what you want to call them, lake run browns or steelhead. Sorry.
Yeah, we lost you there for a second. That's all right. Go ahead. But you were saying if you call
Yeah,
them Lake Runs
yeah,
Rainbows or Steelhead.
yeah. I don't care what you want to call them, lake run, rainbows or steelhead. I think pound for pound, it's a hard fighting fish, and at that point, like, who gives a shit what it is? It's fun as hell.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. They're just so hot, man. I mean,
yeah,
it's like you hook into one and it's like laser beam,
yeah,
lightning on the end of your rod. And you're just, the first time I saw it, it was a buddy of mine on the other side of the hole and he hooked into the steelhead. And I just couldn't. I mean, that thing went around the hole 180 degrees. Next thing you know, it was 50 yards down river. And I'm like, what are you going to do? And he's like, just held on and it broke off, lost it,
yeah.
right? But it was the highlight of our trip, just seeing that and him feeling that, we caught kings and other fish and, had fun. But that one steelhead that we got into, it was like,
It keep,
you just
it
couldn't
keeps you coming back.
fathom.
It keeps you coming back. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's addicting. Yeah, but you get some hot ones. I had actually the last client I guided up there. Super cool guy from Colorado, just moved here and he was trying to figure out how the game worked here and get the program dialed. We worked pretty hard, and I think we hooked one earlier in the day, but it was pretty short lived. And then he hooks one at the end of the day in this tail out underneath this overhanging tree or these tag elders, and the branches were probably 5 feet above the water. And bobber went down. He sets the hook, and that thing had to be close to 30 inches. I've never seen one jump out that high in the air where like literally his line was tangled in the bushes for a second. And then 20 seconds later, the thing's jumping another 3 feet out of the water, 30 yards down and the tail out. And then it was gone. It was like, oh shit.
It's like a barracuda or a marlin, that thing is just like launching.
Yeah,
It's so
it's wild. Yeah, it's just
and
fun.
you're in a river.
Yeah, it's just
right?
fun.
You're in a super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do this. Let's jump into a little bit of the fishing around town, and you had mentioned there's a lot of opportunities there, and then we're gonna wrap it up with our tip on the wading side.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as fishing goes around the Twin Cities area, we have a lot of it. There's a lot of water. If you're trying to fish lakes, I live just like 5-10 blocks from Lake Harriet. That's an excellent musky lake. There's lots of nice largemouth. We have Lake Minnetonka. That's an excellent fishery. They have smallmouth, largemouth, musky, walleye. There's some big fish in there. But I fish, I mostly fly fish on the rivers out here. I like going downtown Minneapolis even. You can go underneath like Stone Arch Bridge over there. I got a bunch of buddies who love fishing that. It's kind of flats area where you can, sight fish carp. Super fun.
Mm-hmm.
And then I love going down below one of the dams in the cities. Um, and I like swinging flies there in the springtime. Um, it's just good casting practice. We always get out there with a couple buddies and mess around. But you can catch anything in there that swims, on a swung fly, really, if you're doing it right and you can get down and dirty with it. So a lot of times out there, I'll run a T14, pretty heavy sink tip, and run that to a jig head, the same hook and the same bead I tie those stones with. But I'll tie like a white bunny leech. If
Okay.
the water's up pretty high, and what I'll do is when I'm swinging that, I'll cast it upstream, and really give it some time to get down deep. And you can get those things, 15 foot deep if you need to. And a lot of times, especially in the spring, you get those walleye coming up on the sand, in the river there. And you can kind of swing it. It's kind of swinging and you're kind of bumping it as you're swinging it too, just to kind of get a feeling for where you're at when you're
Get a
down
little
there.
action.
But that's a good way to
Mm-hmm.
target walleye out here on a swung fly. And we do the same thing too for, smallmouth bass and that sort of thing. And you can throw, weightless woolly bugger works really well down there. Kind of whatever, clouser minnow. But it's just kind of fun. The last couple of years, I've just been experimenting with swinging flies for other species than just steelhead. And super fun.
Yeah, the walleye thing sounds interesting because it's a deep water fish, right?
Yeah, but in the spring,
It's not really common to get them on the fly.
yeah, in the
So,
spring, you can catch them in 3-4 feet of water. And they come up out of the depths, and then they'll go up into the feeder creeks too. The tributaries of the Mississippi, and you can get them swinging in the creeks too if you hit it at the right time and swing in whatever leech pattern you want. It's definitely kind of a bump and swing thing, and I've noticed that too. Like when you're swinging for those other species, if you're swinging a run, you can get down deep and it's fast enough current. You can swing it and just kind of go straight to the reel like you would a steelhead. Just wait for the grab and then for it to pull drag and it's on. But I've found, this winter when I was doing it for smallmouth bass by our power plant up here, the water gets warm and you can fish for smallmouth all the way till February if you want, which is cool. But
okay.
I was trying to figure it out. I'm like missing a lot of fish, and I found out if you're in the slower water and you're swinging and kind of bumping, you kind of got to keep your hand on the line. Wait till you feel the grab and just give it a quick pop of a strip set. Not too aggressive, just pop it a couple inches, and that seemed to help, with the hook set on the smallies on the swing. But I don't know. It's just fun trying something different.
Right. Who knows? I mean, are they? My initial impression would be, the bigger predator fish are attacking a little bit more from the side. They also have a little more mass behind them. Whereas, like a smallie might be running up from the behind and gulping it in, and you're not getting the same kind of hook set because you don't have the mass behind it. It's coming from a different direction.
Yeah, and same with.
Yeah, that's interesting that you figured that out.
Well, I think I figured it out. It seemed to be working. Some days it's different, but
yeah, we never know. But
yeah,
we can believe in our confidence.
Yeah, I was
in some way or another.
I was going crazy this winter, like really trying to figure it out. I'm tying all these different sorts of flies to swing for smallies and for walleye or whatever, and trying to tie it. I know Ed Ward had tied some flies that he ties more on the hook bend, so like the hook's gonna be at the head of the fly, because that's where that they're gonna smack it compared to steelhead, which I've caught smallies on intruders swinging them, but you'll notice if you do it, yeah, they'll eat it, but you hardly ever hook them. You always lose them. So experimenting with different flies and stuff, it's just kind of fun. Keeps me busy.
Yeah.
Way to play with my two-handed rod around town.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like a great fishery. A lot of different things too, and the fact that you got all those different species. I mean, I heard you mention bowfin.
Yeah.
All kinds of different stuff.
Yeah.
So
we'll just throw like a full sink line or a sink tip line too. Overhand casting down there on the river, in some of those deep pools, and you can catch anything. All you got to do is count to 10 or count to 15 before you even start stripping your line in. Give your line some time to get down there, You will snag bottom and lose a lot of flies, but you never know what you're going to catch. Like, which is what's so cool about, fishing down there.
Yeah. 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 Very cool. All right. Let's talk about this wading scenario. I really like this tip because I think it's a direction that a lot of people don't necessarily think from. So I'm just going to leave it up to you to dive in however you want on that one.
Yeah. So I think when I first got into swinging flies, it was kind of like a confidence thing where it was like, well, I'm going to bring my nymph rod with, and I'm going to nymph, for steelhead until I get on the board, and then I'm going to start swinging flies because I didn't have that much confidence in it or whatever. And then it finally started clicking for me. I started catching more fish, and then I realized, like, usually the popular side of the river that everyone's fishing from, or the side that you're nymphing from, everyone's swinging from that side too, and the deeper part of that run is going to be on the opposite side of the river of you. So when you make that cast and you're standing on the shallow side, your fly is going to land on the other bank, right? Let's say it's 4 or 5 foot deep on the other bank, and that's the bucket, and the fish are all in that bucket. Your fly is way above their head, right? You will get to them eventually by the time it swings down into them, or you can throw a weighted fly with a mow tip and, cast it straight across from you and let that get in the bucket that way. But on those, a lot of those rivers up there, you have so much overhanging trees and that sort of thing. You end up losing a lot of flies in trees. Your fly's way too high above the fish, and you're not catching as many. So what I found is, if you stand on the other side of the river, and usually it's the shitty side of the river that's, chest deep almost, and it's full of big boulders, and it absolutely sucks to wade in most of the time. If you're standing in the deep stuff and you make that cast out into the shallow side, what happens is, as that fly is swinging across the run and getting deeper and deeper, by the time you get to your hang down, you're in the bucket, you're in that fish's face, and you will catch, more fish that way. So I found that's super helpful. And you can also, let your fly, when you're on that deeper side, really marinate, in that deep stuff. Give it a couple pops and twitches, and a lot of times you'll get the bite right there on the hang down, which, let's see, if you're fishing from the shallow side or the deep side, your hang down, sometimes in most runs, you're just tanking into the bank, when it starts coming back up.
Right.
So you don't even get a hang down. So, like, you're really not letting that fly, hang out in front of the fish's face for as long as possible. So that I think is a good tip. If you're able to stand on the shittier side of the river, the deeper side, give it a try.
Right.
You can also try, if you can't really get in there, stand above the run and just keep letting more and more line out and cast as far as you can, and get it down in there from the deep side. It's another way to try to do it.
Right. Okay. When you when you get into the bucket, I want to kind of set up the scenario of it. It's a tough day, right? You're casting, you're like, I know there's fish in there. We're just not getting the eats. Like, what are the 3 or 4 things that you like to implore, I guess, to maybe trigger a strike, or build your confidence of, like, okay, now I'm being maybe a little more active in my fishing or whatnot. What are those things that you like to do?
Yeah, we'll do that too. Like, sometimes you'll be fishing a run, right, for like 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden, like, there's nothing's happening. Then all of a sudden a fish jumps out, and you're like, what the heck? Why didn't he just eat? I just drifted past that or swung past that 20 times. What's going on here? When that happens, if I'm swinging, I'll switch flies, start back up at the top and go again. And also make sure you're covering, every inch of that hole. Fish that inside seam and fish it well. Start at the head, fish the inside, fish the center, gut, bucket, whatever, and then fish the outside. And then work into the middle of the run and do the same thing all the way through the tail out. And definitely, if the water's high enough and those tails are pumping it, I'd definitely spend a lot of time in the heads and the tails. When those fish are moving in between runs, especially, first light, last night light, when they're really kind of moving. That can help a lot, but it definitely helps, I think, with the swinging. Like, sometimes I'll swing through a run 3 times before I, get a grab and just keep changing flies. or you get a grab on a fly when you're swinging through. You're like, dang it, it came off. Swing back through right away, or just step 3 feet back upstream, change your fly out real quick there, and throw it again right there. And a lot of times they'll grab it again if it's something different, because you know where they're at. They're going to hold there. So that can help, I think. But yeah.
Do you get to a point where days where you're like, I'm going to just start imparting a lot of action on my fly when I feel like I'm in the zone to trigger strikes, etc., whether it's rod tip lifting or short jigging or whatever it might be?
Yeah, sometimes if you're in a shallow enough run, I actually learned this from an Ohio guide, Mike, the fly guy. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but he I thought he was joking. He was like, I want you to pop your rod 4 or 5 times as it's swinging through the run. And I'll look at my buddy I was with, and we're kind of like, what is he talking about? And we're only fishing a run that was 3 or 4 feet deep. So it really didn't matter if we popped our fly a little bit. It just brings it up a little, and it'll get back down. You wouldn't want to do that if you're fishing a 10-foot deep hole. But what it did was when you give it a pop, it's just going to make that fly kick a little bit. And it's just like that reaction bite. Like, why does a walleye eat? It eats when you jig it. And when you're jigging it, that's when the walleye gets the reaction and smacks it. It's the same thing with steelhead sometimes. And it's worth a try. If you're having a tough time and there's fish in there and you went through a couple times, not much, just pop your rod tip up, 6 inches or whatever, and give that thing a kick. And usually right after you pop it and set it back down, that's when it's like, you'll get the grab. Oh. Yeah. It's kind of fun. Yeah. And I was doing that for the smallmouth too. It was working pretty well, especially if you have if you have a fly with a bulkier head on it, it'll really kind of kick to the side. Nice.
Yeah. Kick it. Right. Well, cool, man. Joshua, it was good to have you on the show, man. I don't know a ton about that region, and I think a lot of our listeners are like me in that scenario of had no idea what the variety really was. It made a lot of assumptions, but man, you really educated us today. So, like all my guests, I think I say I can't wait to get out there, and I know I won't be able to make every destination, but if and when, we definitely got to hook up and swing some bugs here.
Yeah, come on out, everybody. Come on out. It's a good time.
You got it, LarryTheLunker.com. Is that what it is?
Yes. Yep, that's my website.
All right. Yeah. All right. So LarryTheLunker.com. We'll get that in the show notes for you guys. You want to go have a good time, do a bunch of different styles of fishing, and know that you're going to have something available. Give Josh here a call, and we'll go from there. Thanks again, Josh.
Thank you.
Good hanging.
Thanks.
You got it, man. Bye.